First thing I do when I sit down, put on my seatbelt. Like, first thing, so I don't forget it ever. So, locked in. Now I'm going to close my door. Now I'm going to take a look around. So I'm going to look at my mirrors. Make sure my mirrors are adjusted properly to where I want them. Look at my windshields. Make sure they're securely mounted. No cracks or damages, no leaks, and no illegal stickers. You can't put stickers on the inside of a windshield. So, look at that. Then I'm going to look at my steering wheel. Make sure it's securely mounted and I don't have more than 10 degrees of play in the steering wheel. The rule is 10 degrees or 2 inches, but 2 inches is on a 20-inch steering wheel. This is about an 18-inch wheel, so it's going to be about, 1.8 inches or whatever. But 10 degrees is about that much, so just kind of feel it. Then I'm going to check my gear shift, make sure it's securely mounted, no cracks or damages, and that it is in neutral, which I can tell because it moves freely. So, at this point I'm going to turn the key on, but in order to turn the key on, in order to start the truck anytime, I'm going to go through the safe start procedure. The safe start procedure is, make sure the parking brakes are applied, make sure I'm in neutral, the right foot covering the brake pedal, left foot pushing the clutch all the way in. Now I'm going to turn the key just to on. So I'm not going to start the truck, just turn the key on. So I'm going to look at my warning indicator lights on the dashboard, make sure they cycle on and cycle back off. That lets me know that they work. And in particular, I'm going to pay extra attention to the ABS light. Make sure it works. For some reason, DOT loves the ABS. I don't know why they have such a thing for their ABS. I mean, they should marry it. Like, it's weird. But so I'm going to check all my warning indicator lights, make sure they turn on and off, in particular the ABS. Then, since I'm on the indicators, I'm going to check some other dashboard indicators. So I'm going to start with my left turn signal indicator. All I care about right now is that the dashboard tells me they're working. I don't care if it works outside. I just care that the dash light works. So, my right turn signal indicator, my four-way flasher indicator, and my high beam indicator. Okay, all those work. So, we're good on that. Now, at that point, working left to right. So from left to right, over here, because I was just on the left turn signal, this little signal stalk is also my wiper and washer switch. So I'm going to pull this little collar down, and that activates the wipers and the washer, so I'm going to make sure they work. So wiper and washer have to work. You can't just have wipers, you have to have a washer too. So those work. Now continuing left to right, check my city horn and my air horn. Okay, those work. Now again left to right, heater and defroster. Right. Everything's working. So now I'm finished with this part. I'm going to start the truck up and check the gauges. So safe start again. Now the first time you go to safe start, describe the entire process. Second time, all you have to do is mention it. So, but you still have to do it. You don't have to talk her through the whole thing. So I'm going to go through safe start and start the engine. So. Now the first thing I look at, and once I start, double check it's in neutral, I can let off the clutch. Okay? The first thing I look at once the engine's running is the oil pressure gauge. That has to rise up to operating pressure within a few seconds, which it does. So at this point we're going to go through all the gauges. We're going to name the gauge and read out what it says and give the unit of measure. So the oil pressure gauge is about 30 psi. Our amp gauge is reading about 60 plus amps or positive 60 amps. Our voltmeter is reading 13.5 volts. The water temperature gauge is reading 125 degrees. My tachometer is just under 700 RPMs. My speedometer is flat because we're not moving. We will check that later when we move the truck. My primary and secondary air pressure gauges are both reading 105 psi. My fuel level gauge is reading full tank. This is the application brake pressure gauge. It's reading 0 right now, but when I push my foot on the pedal, it goes up. That lets me know how much pressure I'm putting on the pedal. So all I do here is just put my foot on the pedal, make sure that gauge works. So it does. My front and rear differential temperature gauges are reading flat because we're not warmed up, we're not moving. Our load suspension gauge is reading about 57 psi. So this gauge gives you a ballpark estimate of how much weight is sitting on the tractor suspension. So you can estimate if you're overloaded or if you got too much forward or backward, but it's not super accurate, but you'll get used to it and be able to tell where you're at, basically. So, oil temperature gauge is reading 130 degrees. Transmission temperature gauge is reading flat because we're not warmed up. The fuel filter and the air filter gauges both read in inches. So the fuel filter is in inches of mercury, that's Hg, and the air filter reads inches of water. So that, you remember that little gauge that we saw on top of the air system? That's the air restriction gauge. That's what this is reading.
Okay.
So
that has a little finger.
yeah, that reads the restriction of air in inches of water. So the fuel filter reads in inches of mercury as far as how restricted the fuel filter is. So we're at 1 inch on the fuel filter, so we're good. We're at 0 inches on the air filter, so we're good. So at this point, I've checked all the gauges other than the speedometer, which comes later, and now I'm going to turn the truck back off. So for the next section of the test, the key has to be on. So I'm going to turn the truck off, then turn the key back on. But safe start to do that. So key on. This is critical at this point. If the key's not on for this next section, the test don't work. So if you forget to turn the key on and realize it later, ask to start over. So the first condition of the test is to turn the key on. There are 3 conditions we have to set. So the first is key on. Second is we have to make sure the truck doesn't move. So we're going to immobilize the vehicle, and we can do that by chalking the wheels outside or just put the truck into gear. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to put the truck into gear. Now, remember that the truck is in gear, so when you later start the truck up, you make sure to put it back into neutral so you don't fail the test. So, truck's in gear. This is simpler than you chalking the wheels. So, we're just going to do this. So that is condition 2 for the test. The reason we immobilize the truck is because we're releasing the parking brakes. So, that's why we're making sure it doesn't roll. So that's step 3, and condition 3 of the test is that the parking brakes are released. So, pushing both knobs. Once these knobs are in, your right foot had better stay on that brake pedal, just in case. Because if this thing moves, you better stop it. So if you take your foot off the brake pedal and she sees it, you're going to fail the test. You cannot have your foot off the brake pedal during this while the parking brakes are released, even though we've immobilized the truck. So 3 conditions for the test. Key is on, truck's in gear, parking brakes are released. Now we can start the test. So the first one is the static air test. We're basically just going to check the air system now that we've put pressure in it. So when we push in these knobs, we pressurize the system. So now there's air in the system. We want to make sure it holds that air. It doesn't bleed it off too fast. So we're going to watch the primary air pressure gauge for 1 minute and make sure we don't lose more than 3 psi in 1 minute. Now, on this truck and trailer, that trailer has air suspension that inflates as soon as you push in the parking brake. So you're going to have to wait about 45 seconds for that to finish inflating before you can start this test, or else otherwise it's going to read wrong. So it's been about that long. So we're going to start the static air test. I'm going to monitor the primary air pressure gauge. That's the only one that matters for these tests. So got a timer, and I'm going to start for 1 minute. I'm going to make sure we don't lose more than 3 psi. I'm at 90 psi, so I'm going to sit here for 1 minute. And chances are she's not going to make you sit for a minute. She's going to say, okay, just tell me, you know, she'll say, like, assume it's been a minute. So you're okay. It's been 1 minute. We lost 1 psi. We're at 99 psi. So we passed that test. So give her the readouts, have the numbers. And if for some reason you started too early and the trailer's still inflating and the air's dropping and you go more than 3 psi, just read it as if it's 3. You know, she's not looking that closely. Just say, oh, well, we went from 91 to 88. We're good. Don't say we went from 91 to 80 because you failed the test. Don't fail the test, okay? So it could happen because that thing is wonky back there. So you're going to find that out, trust me. So we've done the static test. We're good. Now we're going to do the applied test. For this one, we're going to push our foot on the brake pedal and we're going to watch the brake application pressure gauge. And we're going to put about 15, 20, somewhere in there, PSI, and we're going to hold it steady. This is a little tricky, so wait until you've got it steadied, and then you're going to start the test. So now we're going to watch this for 1 minute and make sure we don't lose more than 4 PSI this time. The reason this one is 4 and not 3 is because we have a trailer. If we were like a bobtail truck or a straight truck, it'd be 3. But this one, we have a trailer, they give us an extra PSI allowance, so we have 4 PSI. So we're going to watch this for 1 minute with our foot steady, make sure we don't lose more than 4. And she's probably going to say, it's been a minute. And you'll go, okay, we started at 88 psi, we're now at 85 psi, so we passed that test. And then after you've read it out, then you release your foot off the brake pedal. I mean, don't pull it all the way off, just release the pressure. If you do that too early, you may affect the gauge reading. You don't want to do that. So now at this point, we're going to check the low air warning indicator lights. So when we get low air, like you saw in the video yesterday, the lights come on and tell you the air is low. So we're going to pump the air down by pushing on the brake pedal until the lights come on. They have to come on no lower than 60 psi. So we're going to pump it down until they do. All right, they came on at 63 psi, so we're good. Now we're going to check the emergency spring brakes, make sure they work when the air gets too low. So we're going to continue to pump the brakes down and wait for the parking brakes to pop out on their own, and that should happen between 45 and 20 psi. Okay, so we're going to pump them on down until those knobs come out. And you do that by pushing on the pedal. So they popped out right at 45 psi, so we're good. We passed that test. Now, parking brakes are set again. We're out of air. We're finished with the air system test. We checked the system under pressure, make sure everything works right the way it's supposed to. So now, really with no air, all we can really do is start the truck up again. So, make sure we're in neutral, do our safe start again, and I know we just watched these pop out. Going to double check it again. Foot on the brake, clutch in, start the truck. And the key's already on, so we can just start it right up. So, now, double check that I'm in neutral, let the foot on the clutch. What I'm testing here are three things. I'm testing the air compressor itself, because it should fill the tanks up. We're going to watch that happen. That's the trailer. It happens when the suspension goes up and down. It changes the geometry. It moves. So we're checking the air compressor. Make sure it works. We're checking the air compressor governor cut in and cut out. So the governor should cut in at low pressure, allow the compressor to fill the tanks, and then when the pressure gets high enough, the governor should cut out, and you'll hear the air hiss out. So that's what we're checking. So I can already tell two things right now, because the primary gauge is rising. So I know, one, the governor is cut in to allow the compressor to fill the tanks, and two, the air compressor is working. So now I'm just waiting for the governor to cut out, which happens between 120 and 150 psi. So in order to speed this along, I'm going to raise the RPMs, because I can take my foot off the brake now because the parking brakes are set. So I'm going to just idle it up somewhere between 12 and 1500 RPMs. Don't go over 15, because that's just bad for the engine. And just don't like to idle that high. I like to go a little bit over 14, just idle here, so you don't sit here all day. So this is where it can get kind of awkward, because you're sitting here waiting for this to happen. And, you can either just describe extra things that are happening on the dashboard, or you can just sit here nervous